If you have type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, you want to know, what does it actually feel like when your metabolism starts working again? Not when your A1C number drops, not when your doctor says keep doing what you're doing. I mean, when the body finally starts responding the way it's supposed to. When you wake up with a fasting glucose in the 80s for the first time in years. When you're not exhausted at 2 p.m. When you realize you've gone 3 hours without thinking about food. That experience is real. It happens to people who address the root cause instead of just chasing the number. And in this video, I want to tell you what that reversal actually looks like, what changes first, what changes next, and why it happens in that specific order. I'm Debbie Marini, former endocrinology nurse practitioner and founder of the Steady Sugar program. Let's talk about what's actually possible. Here's something I've noticed after years of working in endocrinology and then in metabolic health coaching. Most people with type 2 diabetes or prediabetes are never shown what real reversal looks like. They're given targets. They're told to manage things. They're put on a treadmill of lab work and medication adjustments, but nobody sits down and says, here's what it looks like when your metabolism actually starts functioning again. Here's the sequence of changes you can expect. Here's how you'll know it's working. That gap matters because if you don't know what to look for, you'll miss the early signs. You'll get discouraged before the big changes arrive. Or you'll stop trusting the process right when your body is starting to respond. So let me walk you through what actually happens, what the research tells us, and what I've watched clients experience firsthand. The first changes that happen when you start addressing the metabolic inflammation loop are mostly invisible. They happen before your fasting glucose moves, before your A1C budges, before the scale shifts. In the first few weeks of reducing inflammation and beginning to heal the gut integrity, here's what's happening under the surface. Inflammatory cytokines, the chemical signals that have been blocking your insulin receptors, they begin to decrease. Your gut lining starts repairing, which reduces the constant flow of inflammatory particles into your bloodstream. Your cells start hearing insulin again. Not perfectly, not yet, but the signal is getting through more clearly than it was before. People often notice this phase as subtle changes in energy, less of that mid-afternoon crash, waking up feeling slightly more rested, a little less bloating, fewer cravings, especially in the afternoon for something sweet. None of these feel like reversing diabetes, but they're the foundation. The inflammation is quieting. The system is preparing to respond. The next thing that happens, usually within 4 to 8 weeks when someone's genuinely addressing the root cause, is that blood sugar begins to stabilize. Not necessarily lower yet, but stabilize. The swings become less dramatic. You don't spike as hard after meals. You don't crash as low a few hours later. The variability starts to narrow. This is your liver beginning to respond to insulin again. Hepatic insulin sensitivity. The liver's ability to receive insulin signal to stop producing glucose starts to improve. For a lot of people, this is when they notice their fasting glucose shifting. That morning number that was like 130 to 140 starts coming down. Not overnight, but consistently. Over weeks, it trends downward. One client I worked with, her fasting glucose had been in the 130s to 140s for over 2 years. After working through phase 1 of the program, she saw a drop into the 110s and then the 90s over about 10 weeks. She told me, I kept thinking it was a fluke. I kept waiting for it to go back up. But it didn't go back up. The system was functioning differently because the inflammation was no longer blocking the signal. Here's why this happens in the order that it does and why you can't skip steps. The metabolic inflammation loop works like a cycle. Gut inflammation leads to inflammatory signals that block insulin receptors, then insulin resistance worsens, blood sugar rises, elevated glucose creates more oxidative stress, which creates more inflammation, and the loop continues. When you start breaking that loop, specifically by healing the gut and reducing systemic inflammation, the cycle begins running in reverse. Less gut inflammation is fewer gut inflammatory signals. Insulin receptors start responding, blood sugar stabilizes, there's less oxidative stress from high glucose and leads to even less inflammation. It's a restoration cascade. and once it starts, the changes compound. That's why people often describe the process as slow, 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 and then suddenly everything shifted. It's not sudden. The work was accumulating the entire time, but there's a threshold where enough inflammation has cleared the system and it starts responding in a way that you can actually feel and measure. So what does it look like on the other side? I wanted to be specific because reverse diabetes can sound abstract. It looks like a fasting glucose consistently in the 80s and 90s without medication or with significantly reduced medication. It looks like a post-meal spike that peaks at 120 instead of 190 and comes back down within 90 minutes. It looks like an A1C of 5.4 where it started at 8.2, like one client who got there over 6 months and 3 medications down to 0. But it also looks like this: sleeping through the night without waking at 3 a.m. wired and anxious, eating a piece of fruit and feeling fine, going on vacation and not having a complete metabolic derailment, looking at a meal as food, not a threat. That last one matters because chronic inflammation dysfunction doesn't just affect your glucose. It affects your relationship with your body. It creates fear, hypervigilance, exhaustion from trying to control everything. When the system is working again, that exhaustion lifts, not because you stopped caring, but because your body stopped fighting you. Reversal isn't a miracle, it's a sequence. It starts with quieting inflammation. It progresses through gut healing. It results in restored insulin sensitivity in your muscles, your fat cells, and your liver. And when those systems are working again, your body does what it was designed to do. It regulates itself. If you want to understand the full 3-phase process, exactly how I walk clients through the inflammation reset, the balance blueprint, and the body wisdom method, I've put together a free 20-minute training that explains the complete framework. It covers why medication and diet alone don't fix the root cause, what the inflammation loop actually is, and the sequence your body needs to restore function. You can watch it at the link below. And if this video gave you some hope, please share it with someone who needs to hear that reversal is real. It's not about trying harder, it's about addressing the right thing in the right order. Subscribe if you haven't. I put out new videos every week on reversing insulin resistance and restoring metabolic health. I'll see you in the next one.